Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's Scyushi and I wanted to make a definitive, in-depth starting guide video for Zenith. We're going to be going through the game and explaining different mechanics as they come up for a first player. So starting first of all, when you get to the title screen here, you're going to end up seeing a bunch of different servers, which originally you could only swap servers every 24 hours, but now they actually took the lock off of that and you can just pick a server at any time. I'm always playing on Kitsune 2 US West, just in case you guys are wondering. And first and foremost, you can always end up creating a new player and you can have multiple character slots. However, when you are creating a new player, just to let you guys know, you can pick male or female, doesn't really matter. All of this is just cosmetic, so it's not really super duper important what you end up picking. The only thing that really matters is your class. Now, the thing is that the game is going to end up having only two main classes right now, which is going to be a Blade Master, which is physical damage, literally holding swords, and then a magic or mage character that is going to end up using guns. So I'll end up messing around with both of those classes today to show you guys, but the important thing to keep in mind is the subclass roles right here. So there's going to be DPS, support, and tank. The interesting thing that the game doesn't really tell you though is that at any point while you're playing the game, you can end up swapping your subclass on the fly with a slight cooldown between swapping subclasses. So if you create one warrior, that's the only warrior that you're going to need for the entirety of the game, because you can just end up swapping your subclasses anytime that you want. And the way that it works is, let's say that I end up being a DPS warrior and I get to level 5 and then I swap to a support or a tank. It means that I'm going to actually have double experience points until these other classes reach my current highest level subclass, which would be the level 5 DPS. Then you end up picking your character name, which is unanimous across the board. All the other servers end up having it, so it is kind of important. But anyways, let me just swap over to my mage right here so I can give you guys a little rundown of the basics. Now, another thing I kind of forgot to mention when you were selecting your character is you could have chosen your comfort settings, but if, like me, you ended up just creating a character right away and you plop down right here at the starting area, you'll notice that if you end up pressing the options button and you go to this icon right here that shows your little VR player, this is where you'll end up choosing all of your comfort settings. So this is like, having darkness go around your screen when you're moving and stuff like that. Change the way that you end up gliding, which we'll get into the different mechanics of the gliding later. I did want to just kind of briefly show that this menu is here, and it's really important that you end up going through it and finding something that is comfortable for you. I fortunately don't have any type of motion sickness, so I just kind of have everything super standard and smooth. Another thing too is if you're a streamer or content creator, you're immediately going to want to open up this menu just so that you can change from the default to either smooth first person or third person. So the way that the third person works, if I can sort this out, is you guys won't see it, but there's actually a green camera right here, and I can just pick it up at any time and change the angle with which it's looking at me. So I can have like an over the shoulder view, but then you see, some stuff might get caught in the camera angle or whatever. So I always just end up using the smooth first person, which does make it, in terms of your guys' perspective, it might make it a little hard to see these menus. So I'll try to explain, things as best as I can. But anyways, the game is going to basically set you up with this NPC right over here. And I can kind of run through the basics of combat and how the questing works. So you can always wave at these characters to slowly fill up their quest meter. Frankly speaking, I'd rather just click on it and then you'll end up getting a bunch of different quests right here. Mika is going to end up being a returning character that you're going to see throughout the game quite a bit, which a lot of myself and other players always refer to her as like Mika 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth, because the game will constantly refer to, go talk to Mika in this specific area, but it's not 100% clear after you've visited her. So anyways, first of all, we're going to be showing off the mage character, which the mage character is going to end up having these two projectile weapons right here. So you can end up shooting them just normally, and you can see an ammo counter right here as it slowly goes up, which does mean you can spam your shots until you are out of ammunition, and then you gotta wait for it to regenerate. You can at any point end up having a full charge shot though. to end up doing extra damage. It also does some area of effect damage and so on and so forth. So that's going to end up being the basics of how the mage works. If you're playing as support, your shots will no longer go through other players because you'll actually heal players by shooting them. And if you ever want to end up healing yourself, you can do a charge shot straight to the ground, and then that'll end up healing you. And then if you are playing as a tank mage, your shots are actually going to end up being kind of these laser beams. And all of the spells and everything like that are going to end up changing based on the subclass that you're using. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of that stuff, just going to kind of lead you guys in the right direction as to how that's all going to end up working. So first of all, there's going to be the movement ability for the mage is going to end up being a teleport. So you quite literally can see where you can teleport, where you can't teleport. The way that the teleport works is it actually is going to end up being slightly offensive. So from the point that you teleport away, it'll actually end up having a little bit of an impact zone, which you can see is a little bit jank or whatever. But anyways, at any time you can end up opening up the menu. And right here, second to your inventory is going to end up being the Godstone slot. And this is where you'll end up seeing all your different abilities that you'll end up unlocking. You can click on them at any point and it'll end up giving you a description of how these end up working. And we'll go into a little bit more detail later as to all these different Godstone slots and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, you can end up getting a pretty good handle of how they're all going to end up working. And the way that it does work is each of the different spells is going to end up having a different gesture in order to do it. So for the mage, for example, we just create a fist, and you can see that just creating the fist is going to end up selecting the snowball effect or the instacast one. It can be a snowball effect, it can be a fireball, or you can always hold the grip button and then you can see there's vertical up or down or to the side. So if I move my hand to the side, I've readied up this fireball spell, which is kind of just burn the area for a set amount of time. And you'll notice that as a mage, your mana is going down while you're using any of these abilities. So I can do a swipe up. It's a little bit... Did that work? Yeah, there. That was my swipe up attack. And then I can do a swipe down, and that'll end up being a giant boulder. And it's pretty easy to end up casting these abilities, generally speaking. But you're going to drain a lot of your mana while you're doing so. But the mana will end up coming back. So now I've actually relogged and swapped over to my warrior so I can give you guys kind of the basics of this. So the warrior is going to end up using melee weapons. These are going to end up having collision with themselves, and you can actually see as soon as I end up doing a swipe attack, well, I gotta hit an enemy, but pay close attention to the top of the sword because that's going to end up having an effect on it that is something that's really, really important. So I do optimal damage, and then you wait for the sword to charge, and once you see the first orb show up at the end of your blade, that means you are ready to do the next damage. So I could swipe again right away, and then I could end up damaging an enemy again and still having optimal damage. This is so that they prevent you from just going crazy and attacking like a lunatic. Basically, it would end up lowering my damage, although these mobs are too easy, so I just one-shot them anyways. However, the secondary, so you can end up seeing, I'll do a swipe, and then it charges once, and then that second hit right there, that's like super optimal damage. So what you could end up doing if you end up timing it correctly is you could be attacking, you attack with both, and then you continually attack with your right hand or your left, whatever, and then you wait for your other hand to end up getting the super optimal orb, and then you could end up doing like a bigger attack, which is just something that you can do. So now there's a couple other mechanics I gotta let you guys know about. If you're just holding the grip and not actually like charging the sword and getting it ready for anything, you can end up throwing it, and that'll end up causing damage. The sword will automatically come back to you. You can do fancy stuff too, where you can actually like throw your sword up in the air. It's not working right now, but you can throw your sword up in the air and then bat it into enemies, which is difficult to do, but it's just kind of a fun little thing that you can end up doing. But at any point, you can start holding the triggers, and this will initiate a couple different functions. So if I can hopefully get this enemy to aggro me, you can do it to block enemies, and a lot of enemies will end up having televised attacks. You can see that my stamina is slowly depleting like crazy, which is this yellow bar right here. So this is really important if you're going to end up being a tank character and blocking a lot and protecting your team and so on and so forth. But then how do you end up doing the special ability? So you can see right here, we've got a downward thrust as our special attack. So if I end up holding trigger on both of these and then I do a downward thrust, that initiates our special attack and then ends up draining our mana on the warrior. Also, the movement ability that we have as the character is going to end up being a dash. So if we dash through an enemy, it actually ends up causing a little bit of damage as well, or like takes aggro or something. You know, you can end up going through the Godstone and seeing that it ends all the different abilities that you end up getting and so on and so forth. I don't know why Cleave wasn't selected. That's kind of weird. And at any point, if you want to swap your subclass, you can end up just picking them right here. So I could end up just swapping to a tank, which ends up changing all of my abilities around, and I get a slight cooldown before I can end up swapping classes again. But you'll also notice that a lot of my armor and weapons ended up getting thrown off of my character, and the reason for that is because when you end up swapping your subclass, obviously you're changing your level to that subclass's level, and in this case, I haven't actually leveled up my tank at all, so I'm level 1, which means that I can't end up equipping a lot of the armor and weapons that I had previously. So I swap back to my mage just for the sake of the video because I'm a lot stronger on this character, and let's talk about Godstones before we move to the next segment. So Godstones, you'll notice as you're selecting and unlocking all these different abilities, you might notice that I have a bunch of different options. So the default Godstone is basically going to be leveling up, but it doesn't have any major upgrades or minor upgrades, and the only difference between finding these rarer Godstones, which you'll get from quests or just by fighting mobs and stuff like that, is that they end up having the same stats. However, as you're leveling them up, you can literally spend points in them to level up these different random passive abilities. So it decreases the cooldown time of this ability, increases crit power of this ability, or in this case, I would end up having to spend 3 points in total to end up unlocking dealing 60% more damage over time, and so on and so forth. So you're constantly having to swap these just so long as you want to end up having the most efficient one possible. Basically, you're always going to be leveling up the highest rarity, but if at any point you want to end up getting rid of any of these, you'll basically select it, and then you got to click this little trash icon right here, and then it's going to say, you know, do you want to do this? You can either accept, decline, but you can also hit this checkbox right here that says hide this prompt for this play session, so that you can end up then just doing it multiple times without getting the confirmation. You want to be very careful with the ones that you end up destroying. You don't want to end up destroying any of the Godstones that, you know, are ones that you end up using. I do find it a little bit tedious as you're going through the different Godstones. Sometimes you might need to re-equip certain ones and so on and so forth, especially if you end up swapping your class, because that's or subclass, because that's really going to end up messing up your Godstone equipment and your gear equipment. So we'll get into the gear a little bit later, because the main quest is going to be teaching you about climbing right now. So as our stamina ends up depleting while we're climbing, so while we're holding on to something, you know, not really much stamina is being depleted. It is slowly depleting over time, but it's the movements that end up really depleting your stamina. So you'll end up depleting more and more the further distance you go. So it's very similar to a game like Zelda Breath of the Wild or even Genshin Impact, where basically you can climb so long as you still have stamina. So the gliding mechanics is literally just T-posing. So I'm going to move it to a third-person camera just so you guys can see this. I'm going to jump, and then I'm going to T-pose right after, and now I'm actually gliding. So you can see that my speed is really, really slow right now because of the way that I have my... because of the option that I have for my glide settings. So I'm going to kind of put it back to first person and show you guys this real quickly. So the default gliding is going to end up being just kind of a standard move forward while gliding type of thing. But generally speaking, I would recommend that you mess around with these other glide settings right here. And the one that I find the most fun and gratifying is strafe, because the way that this is going to work is it means that not only are your arms going to be independent of your head, meaning that I can start gliding and I can look around, but so long as I'm T-posing, I'm still going in a forward momentum based on where my arms are located. But the other thing too is that if I end up outstretching my arms and have them flat like this, basically this is going to have me going straight. But if I end up pushing my thumb down towards the ground, it's basically going to end up making me swoop downward, right? But you can end up using momentum to swoop down and then pull up, basically having your thumb facing up into the air. And then so long as you end up swooping and having that momentum, you can actually gain altitude in this manner. But it also means that we can end up going really, really fast. And that's something that I know not everybody's going to be super into, but it's something that I'm really into. So that's why we're going to end up doing this. You can see we're going straight. And then if I swoop down and then go back up, you kind of have a lot more control. But you'll notice that my arm, you know, you're kind of, it's going to take a little while to get used to it. But once you do, trust me, it's awesome. Before we end up getting into the open world exploration, as I said, I wanted to have this tutorial in a chronological manner. So I'm going to introduce different mechanics as the game introduces them. So right here, this is actually going to end up being an upgrade station. So the way that it works is you quite literally will take the piece of gear that you want to upgrade, put it in here, and then it's going to end up taking a certain amount of resources. So you can see basic enhancement dust. And then once we end up getting the basic enhancement dust, it's going to end up increasing the primary stat value of this piece of gear. So the primary stat is quite literally dependent on your subclass. So in our case, we're a DPS. So the primary stat increase is going to basically give me more damage. You can do this if you want to end up upgrading. You can see that it's going to cost you a certain amount of money, and it's also going to end up having a percentage chance of success. And that's going to end up getting worse and worse and worse the more you end up upgrading the gear. You can also see that there's different tiers of upgrade materials all the way up to magic, which is the purple. And how do you end up getting this stuff? Well, if I end up opening up my inventory and going to my item selection, this is going to end up being a very important mechanic that the game doesn't really explain very well. So if I end up taking, like, let's say there's this level 6 piece of armor right here, I'm going to press the trigger, and now I'm basically moving it around in my inventory, right? So at any point, I could end up putting it down on this X to delete it. Or if I take this piece of gear and drag it up to this right here, this red dust, this dirt, right? That is dismantling it. So what that's going to do is as soon as I dismantle it, it ended up giving me more of the unique enhancement dust. So that's literally how you'll end up getting the different tiers of enhancement dust so that you can then end up upgrading your gear and so on and so forth. So you're kind of constantly going to be breaking down your extra gear that you end up getting. You won't be able to get rid of your starting weapons, and the reason for that is because if you end up swapping your subclass at any point, you might not be able to use your primary gear because it's just too high level. So these not deleting is specifically so that you will always end up having a piece of equipment that you can end up using. Right over here is going to end up being the chef, which this guy is something that I completely overlooked when I first started playing the game. He's going to end up having various quests where he wants you to go out into the field and gather carrots, gather basil, and he's going to kind of give you a tutorial as to where you'll end up finding these different materials so that you can then end up getting into the cooking. Quite literally, out in the world, there's going to end up being these various materials. You can bend down and get them yourself if you want, and then you place them on your chest to basically put them in your inventory. But if you see this square, it means that you can actually just grab it and then just put it into your inventory that way, which is really, really handy. So you don't got to always bend down. And, a lot of times you'll end up seeing oranges and trees and stuff like that, like right here. And if you're close enough to it, you can actually just pull it right to you. But otherwise, for ones like that, where it's a little bit too far, you might have to end up climbing in the tree so that you can get close enough to pull it to yourself. And you have a pretty long length of reach, which is really nice. But that's going to end up basically helping out with all the food gathering and so on and so forth. So let's kind of go back a little bit before we get into all this open world stuff. And there's also going to end up being the store right here, which as of right now, the current time that I'm recording this, just has cooking materials, but you can always click next and then you'll be able to sell items as well. So if at any point you really need to end up getting some money, you might want to sell a bunch of your equipment rather than dismantling it. Maybe you're too far into the end game where a lot of the gear that you end up getting just doesn't really matter for the materials, or you just want to end up selling the food because that's an option as well. But you'll notice that you can end up buying all sorts of different basic ingredients, including basic noodles, which is a recipe. Now, you can buy the recipe, but you'll also get recipes from this guy. And the way that this works, the game doesn't really tell you this because this is kind of the only thing that does it, is with this orange rabbit stew, for example, I can still press the trigger and move it around in my inventory. But what I'm going to want to do is grip on this item. All right, so I'm going to grip it. Now it's sitting here, and then I aim off on the side of, not my inventory, and that is how I just learned that recipe. So now I actually have that as an option for cooking. So how does the cooking end up working? Well, if we end up opening up our inventory, and then next to the Godstone, there's going to end up being this cooking pot, and we can end up seeing all the different recipes that we end up making. And food is very, very important in this game because they're going to end up giving you different buffs, including a lot of health regen. So this can end up being really, really good later on when enemies are hitting you a lot harder. So you can see there's cooking, there's also gathering. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a summary of how many times you've gathered each of these different materials, and the more you gather them, the more proficient you're going to get with it. But we'll just toggle on our cooking station right here so I can give you guys a basic summary of how this works. So cookies are going to be the starting material, and then you'll end up getting more the further you go along. You can see that the menu does actually, it's a little bit jank, but hopefully, they fix it soon. Basically, you can select any of these at any point, and then it's going to end up giving you an instruction. So it says warm up milk in a pot, turning the dial in accordance to where it tells you. I'll show you guys in a moment. And then it also wants us to put sugar straight into a skillet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the milk, put it in here, take the sugar, put it directly in the cauldron. So that's our first piece of ingredient. And then we're going to take the flour and we're going to end up putting it into the skillet. The way that we're going to end up initializing the cooking is based on these different things right here. And these are, these higher tiered ones don't really matter too much. It's going to cost you a certain amount of money to use these as far as I know, but it's going to end up basically increasing the tier of the food, which these ones don't really matter too much until later. So we're going to grab this freebie, put it in there, physically move it, and then the skillet, I'm going to be moving and shifting around a bunch. And then on my left side, you can see I'm basically holding and trying to keep the temperature within the green. So that's our milk done. And then I just kind of got to keep flipping this so it doesn't burn. And that's going to end up being our flour done. So now we'll grab these, put them into the skillet, or put them into the cauldron, and there we go. Now we've got a cookie. So we can hold it to our mouth to end up getting the buff, or I can just place it on my chest and then it puts it into my inventory. And that's kind of the summary of how the cooking ends up working. Now, lastly, if you want to end up having any of these food items out in the field with you, you're going to click and drag it to these quick slots. And then it's going to end up having it right here in front of you at any point. So you can end up grabbing it, and then I could end up eating it, nom nom nom, and then you'll see we end up getting the various buffs, which is going to be health, damage, and defense increased from the cookie for, a certain value. And then you can see the just barely the timer slowly slowly dissipating around it. So now we're going to be heading out into town and finally talking about the exploration. But just before we do that, I want to open up the menu really quickly just to show you right down here is going to end up being your microphone and your headphones. So you can at any point mute the sound that you're getting from the oncoming players, but you can also toggle the mute on and off with your microphone as well, which is going to end up being in the sound settings. And you might want to end up going into the voice settings specifically, because a lot of times this game is going to end up having the wrong voice input and voice output. So for the voice output, you basically want to set it up to your speakers, and then for the voice input, you want to set it up to your VR mic. You can end up changing from global chat, talking with all the other people that are out in the world, guild, as well as party if I was actually in a party. But just as a heads up to let you know that this is here as an option. So this is important too. Once I end up going into this area, it's going to lower my level because I'm actually too powerful. Now, I'm still going to be doing really, really high damage for this area, but what it basically is doing is just going to be lowering my health value so that it is possible for me to die from enemies in this various area, so that I'm not like super duper overpowered kind of thing. Now, this is going to end up being what myself and friends are referred to as Mika 1. As I mentioned previously, there's going to be multiple variants of Mika, and the game is going to end up telling you, oh, go talk to this Mika, go talk to this Mika, without really distinguishing which one it wants you to talk to. But there's a couple things that you can end up doing with this Mika. Namely, there's going to end up being a daily quest that you can get from her, which we will, I don't think I have the daily reset right now, but I can kind of just briefly explain how that works. But then there's also going to end up being doing these hunting quests as well as a main quest. So I'm a little bit further along in the main quest, so I can't obtain that quest right now. But basically, the hunting quest is going to be something like this, where she wants us to go out, kill a bunch of the random mobs, and collect materials that we would then end up turning into her in order to end up gaining, a certain amount of repeatable XP. So we could just be fighting them over and over again. However, the one thing that you do gotta keep in mind is that if you at any point end up getting these quests where they want you to end up turning in these certain trophies, so these trophies are not quest-specific items. These are actually crafting items. So I'd recommend that you do a lot of these repeatable quests at the early game, but then as you get further and further along, it might be more beneficial for you to save the items so that you can use them to craft some of the end game gear. Now, if we end up accepting this quest, but maybe we don't want to have the quest, we can always end up going to the quest menu right here, and then you can end up finding it in the hunting and so on and so forth. So this is going to end up being the Fang totems from a different area, Syphilid trophies or Sylphid trophies, whatever. So this we could turn in right now, or I could just abandon it, and then it would no longer be on my quest menu, because at any point we can end up pressing a button to bring up a compass, which is going to show us where our quest markers are. It'll show certain enemies that are related to quests, also shows you east, south, north, blah, blah, blah. But you'll also see this menu right here showing us a list of our quest menu, which again might be a bit difficult for you guys to see in the video. But anyways, let's head out into the open world so I can kind of give you guys a brief summary of how this is going to end up all working, because there's a couple different mechanics that the game is going to slowly introduce to you. So first and foremost, over here at this tower is going to end up being our first repeatable open world character. So these are going to end up being characters as well that you'll kind of see throughout the world. Some of them will give you main quests. Most of them are going to end up giving you repeatables. So if we talk to Shin right here, you can see he's got this quest where we basically have to defeat a specific enemy type in order to end up basically, completing his quest and gaining a bunch of experience. So there's going to end up being all of these mobs right out here in the main field. So there's going to be these basic guys. There's going to end up being the ranged one. And as I mentioned with the warrior, at any time you can end up telephysing, okay, this guy's going to do a stab. I could block that. Okay, this guy's going to end up cycling from that angle. I could block that. As a mage, I don't have the opportunity to block. And if you see red on an enemy at any point, that means that that's going to end up being a crit location. So if you end up blocking and then attacking that red location, you're going to end up dealing more damage. So while you're out in the open world, if you come over here, you will notice a teardrop, which I don't really, I've already collected it, so it's not really super important right now. But basically what those are going to be is you collect enough teardrops, and then you'll be able to turn them into a statue that's chilling over there in the rocks. So right over there is going to end up being the starting entrance. That's Shin's tower. And then just over here is going to end up being the statue that I had mentioned, where again, the main quest is going to end up kind of taking you to here, but this is where you're going to end up turning in your tiers for more stamina. And as you end up progressing, it's going to require more and more tiers. So I think the first one is 10. Next time you come back, he wants 20. Next time you come back again, she wants 30. So that's kind of the incentive for exploring and checking out every little nook and cranny of the world, because that's where you're going to end up finding all of those tiers, because they're very, very hidden. You can also look at your compass, and at any point, you can see there is a chest actually right above me. So it's actually right up there on the rocks, because it's always going to end up showing your level next to what the item is or where players are and so on and so forth. It's kind of like a little 3D compass to keep that in mind, right? So chests are going to be something that you can continually find out in the world, and they will they're going to end up being repeatable. So you can end up at any point, going on a chest run or checking back, in different locations that have certain chests and so on and so forth. So if I go up to this one right here, all you gotta do is attack it. And then it's going to end up opening up, and it's going to end up giving us various crafting components, as well as these materials right here, which are also crafting components. So there's the enhancement dust for enhancing gear, and these are going to be materials that you use to craft new gear. And there's going to end up being world events. So over there where the training dummies is kind of a world event where you have to fight a bunch of mobs within a time limit, defeat enough of them, survive. You'll end up gaining a ton of experience, some money, as well well as some crafting components. Over in this farm section right here is going to end up being something similar, and in certain other areas there's going to end up being ones where you might have to defend a specific zone or so on and so forth. So as I mentioned, here's one of the world events. So you can see we're waiting for the world event to start, and then if you see a purple timer, that's going to end up meaning that the world event is actually on. So I'm going to start this right now, even though I'm not going to finish it, just to give you guys a little example of how this works. So you can see we've got 4 minutes basically to end up surviving the event. If we see these enemies constantly spawning in, and if I tag one of them, you're going to notice this menu right here pops up, because now I've actually initiated the event, which means that we have to survive a certain amount of enemies, which is going to be this yellow bar right here is going to slowly fill up as we defeat more and more opponents. And then once it fills up all the wave will be defeated, and then usually it'll end up going to the next wave, which is going to be end up being harder enemies. Now, another thing too is that there's going to end up being these zip lines kind of out in the world. Sorry, it's a little bit janky for me to grab this one. I don't know why it's so high up, but if you grab it at any point, it'll end up taking you up, and it doesn't really drain much of your stamina to do it. But I wanted to show you this air gust right here, which I probably won't be able to reach without running out of stamina, so I gotta be careful. But at any point, you can go into the air gust, and that will end up kind of giving you more of your stamina back. If you're in standard flight, you're gonna just kind of go straight. So with strafing, I can kind of just hold myself in orbit. Here, let me see if I can do it with this one right here. So if I just hold myself right here, you can see that my stamina is slowly increasing back up while I'm just chilling here, and I'm very purposely T-posing, un-T-posing, T-posing, un-T-posing, so that I can end up basically just hovering here for a little while to get my stamina up, and then I put my arms, my thumb straight forward so I can start gliding once again, right? So I'm just gonna show you guys this right here. If you see something like this, usually it'll mean that it's either a world event that's on cooldown, or it could be a dead player. So the way that you revive other players is normally, like if this was a dead player, for example, you would just end up putting your hand over a certain spot in the smoke. And what's basically going to happen is you'll see the dead player still walking around the smoke. And basically what's going to happen is there's going to be a tether from them to the smoke. And if you put your hand in the right location, you'll start to see that tether slowly fill up and turn blue until it ends up reaching the player, and that's how they end up reviving. However, if you end up dying and there's nobody else around, all you got to do is just put some pray hands going on, and then it's going to end up respawning you. So I also wanted to briefly mention how you're going to party with other people. So if this guy would stand still, basically you're going to end up pointing at him, and then you can see that's how you add friend, invite to party. You would be able to invite to guild if you ended up having the guild. You can also avoid them in order to end up ignoring them. And then at any point you can open this menu, and you can see this right here is going to end up being where you see all of your friends. You can party with them from this menu. There's also going to end up being this right here, which is the guild, which I don't really know what the guild really does. It's kind of janky the way that it works, and there doesn't really seem to be too much in terms of like membership and so on and so forth. So now let's briefly just open up the world map and talk about it just for a moment. So there is fast travel locations, but these are quests designated, so you can't just go out into the open world and get a whole bunch of fast travel locations in areas you're not supposed to be in. The main quest line quite literally will give you fast travel spots. So it's kind of, there's not really much incentive for going out way further than intended, other than maybe you just want to end up exploring other areas and checking out areas that are too powerful for you kind of thing. But you can see, you know, here's some world events around here. This is going to end up being some quest NPCs, side quests available. These are going to end up being story quests available, which some of these end up glitching out because this I know is Mika 2 or Mika over at the bridge. And there's not actually a quest that I can currently get from her, but for some reason the main quest is always still pointing to her. But as you end up unlocking fast travel points, you can always just end up clicking on them at any point, and then it's going to end up teleporting you to that location. The funny thing is that fast traveling is basically the only load screen you'll end up dealing with, because otherwise it's all seamless. You know, it's all just one giant open world. So now, last but not least, we're going to be talking about crafting gear. So if you end up seeing any of these out in the open world, this is crafting new sets of gear. And as I had mentioned previously, this is the material that you end up getting out of chests, but more importantly, a material you get out of world events. And you're going to end up using that to kind of end up crafting various pieces of gear. But you'll also notice that these starting gear anyways from this area ends up taking these horns, which, as I had mentioned previously, these horns are quite literally tied to hunting quests. So I could either turn in the horns to end up gaining a bunch of XP and money, or I could keep them so that I can end up crafting some of this gear. And right now, this gear isn't really super good for me just because of the fact that, this is an under-leveled area. So the further you get in the game, it's going to end up having different unique items that you can end up crafting that will end up costing different materials from the enemies in that area, as well as the world events in that area. So it's kind of a way that the game keeps you from just going to a new area after saving all of these materials and crafting yourself the next tier of gear. No, you have to grind in the new area to get the materials in order to end up crafting this gear. But it is going to end up being unique, which means that it's going to have really high armor, a good primary stat, and then it's randomly going to choose Vanguard, Brainiac, or Mighty, which ends up giving you these different substats. So the end game, or kind of mid to end game, you're going to end up really needing a lot of this crafted gear because this can end up lasting for a very long time versus gear that you end up finding out in the open world. So there is actually a very rare chance that I would be able to get the Galleon cloak in this area, which would end up being a pretty significant boost to the default armor, but the crafted one is always going to end up being stronger than the one that you can find out in the world. So I'll do my best to cut this video down and put timestamps so that you guys can learn everything that you need to know about the game. I'm pretty sure I covered everything. There might be a few things that I missed here and there, in which case you can leave that bit of information down in the comments. And then, yeah, I mean, otherwise, I'm absolutely in love with this game. I think the market for a VR MMO is very, very untapped, and it's really crazy to think that Zenith is just made by a very small indie team, but this game has been popping off. There's not many VR games that I could say buy a VR headset specifically to play this, but Zenith is actually one of them. Like, it's actually an amazing game, really, really fun, and apparently we've got like a third class coming soon. We don't know what it is yet. They keep on teasing it, but I don't know whether it's going to be a bow character or a two-handed sword character. Who knows? But this game ended up being top on the Steam selling charts for 24 hours. That is top including non-VR games. So Zenith was actually selling better than Elden Ring, Dying Light 2, God of War and stuff, which obviously didn't last very long. Most of all, it was just when the game first came out and their servers were dying and everything, but everything seems to be a lot more stabilized now. And I just think that it's really cool that these guys ended up coming out with this type of a game, and it just ended up exploding the way that it is. There is a lot of glitches. Generally speaking, you can climb out into areas that you're not supposed to climb into, but the thing with this game is that it gets the job done, and because the game is selling so well, I think that it's a no-brainer that the game is going to be continually developed and supported. So either way, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video and found it helpful. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have yourselves a wonderful day. Bye-bye.